Thank you very much, Chairman Boxer and Ranking Member Inhofe and distinguished members of the committee for holding this hearing on S-3305, which I want to just make sure for the record is the Big Oil Bailout Prevention Liability Act. We need to act quickly to make sure oil companies are held fully accountable for all damages related to an oil spill. And we have all come a long way since I introduced this legislation with a whole host of my colleagues about a month ago. The administration, as you just cited, has moved to embrace the idea of unlimited liability for drilling in deep waters for all future drilling operations. Senators Vitter and Murkowski have introduced legislation that they say would hold BP accountable for unlimited damages for this incident, but it's silent on future spills. And my proposal with my colleagues has changed as well. When the disaster first occurred, a $10 billion liability cap not only seemed adequate to compensate all those impacted by the spill, but it represented a sizable increase from a ridiculously low current level of $75 million. But this spill is larger in scale than anything we've seen in U.S. waters. It has forever changed our understanding of the potential size of oil disasters, even for someone like me, who had long warned about the danger of rig blowouts. So for that reason, along with 20 co-sponsors, we have amended the legislation for unlimited liability. So we have come a long way, but there is still a ways to go. Now, I find it interesting that those who say that we need to hold the victims harmless in the process and take care of them want to keep largely the present system in place. That's the voices I hear. A system of rather limited liability of $75 million. BP made $94 million each day in the first quarter of this year, so it's less than 1 day's consequence. And I wonder, at the same time, they are pursuing drilling that has unlimited risks. So I wonder whether the drill, baby drill crowd ever thought about the spill, baby spill consequences, because that's what we have today. Now, one of the objections I've heard to removing the liability cap is that it will cause mom and pop drillers to go out of business. My view, this is not a question of small versus big companies. This is about safe versus unsafe companies. If you're drilling in the Gulf and are cutting corners the way BP allegedly has, then there is no doubt that insurers will be charging you more because you are a risky company. And if you are an unsafe company, I'm sure regulators are going to force you to overhaul your operations and use better equipment. That will definitely cost an unsafe company some money to get its operations into compliance. But a company with a higher safety standard should not have those same issues to worry about. The insurers and regulators alike would be able to see that you're operating safely, and in turn, you should be able to continue your operations without the fear of major cost increases. Lifting the liability cap, as we do under the legislation, also instills discipline on oil companies, as Senator Klobuchar was referring to, not to cut the corners, not to take the calculation that the cost of doing business if something goes wrong is a limit of $75 million. And so by lifting the liability cap, we make sure that the incentives are not perverse as they are under the present law. However, if you're an unsafe company that is also small, then we should be all concerned. According to a recent analysis by Credit Suisse, BP's cleanup costs, economic damages, and other related costs could total $37 billion. That is a shockingly high number, but one BP will likely be able to absorb since it is a company well worth over $100 billion. But what if a similar unsafe but smaller company had caused this leak? As you can see from the bar chart that I have bought and the report I provided to the committee, there's a company worth less than $500 million drilling in over 4,000 feet of water in the Gulf. If a $500 million company had been the operator and a spill causing $37 billion in costs and damages had taken place, I think it's clear that the residents of the Gulf and the American taxpayer would be holding the bag for over $36 billion. Is that the liability standards we want? Is that the risk we want to our collective economy? So unsafe companies that are not so big that they could pay for their catastrophic mistakes might have reason to worry. But small, safe companies should be able to continue operating in the Gulf without fear. Finally, as I've mentioned previously, I applaud Senator Vitter for embracing unlimited liability for damages stemming from this spill. but I believe we need to change the law for all potential future spills so that the American taxpayer knows all companies will pay for that which they spill. I also don't believe that Senator Vitter's approach will survive judicial scrutiny because it attempts to form a contract without the consent of the parties and because it is an unconstitutional bill of attainder on just one company and one incident. By contrast, the Department of Justice and the Congressional Research Service have both testified that our bill would survive constitutional challenge. Superfund law is an example of that. We created responsibility for polluting parties that had already polluted, and we created the liability subsequently, and that has been litigated and upheld. So we need to pass legislation that would hold oil companies accountable and hold up in court. It's time we finally start treating oil companies like we do everyone else, Madam Chairman. The average taxpayer does not enjoy a liability cap. The guy installing solar panels on your roof does not have a liability cap, and neither should oil companies. The mom and pops we should be worried about are not oil companies, but mom and pop taxpayers who shouldn't have to pay for the cleanup spills of others. Thank you, Madam Chairman, for the opportunity to testify on our bill, and I'm happy to answer any questions.